Okay, welcome to 13th Tea Time Chat. Actually, today's coffee time chat. We have two American professors drinking coffee, and I also have Americano today. Today, we have very exciting, actually, book launch chat, I would call it. Study abroad and the quest for an anti-tourism experience. I'm sure you have heard about this book already. This has been published in 2020, right? And we have fascinating two editors here today. Yay! Professor John Bodinger de Uriarte, right? Is it right?
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Professor Michael D. Giovine.
Yeah, very good. We only published a book together. It's okay.
Okay, we've known each other for 13 years.
Yeah.
And I hate when people call me J. Koi, But welcome everyone, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be honest with you. When I knew I have to do this tea time chat and I'm reading the book right now, I thought, I know what's in this book, it's a study abroad program, and I've done this, and I've run the study abroad program when I was in Macau, bringing students to Europe, so I know everything, and I've written lots of articles on study abroad, and I know, so I don't have to actually read to do this or book review, right? And then I started reading it on Saturday, and it was completely different from what I was expecting, and that's how I got interested and got through the whole book. And it's a very, very unique book about study abroad program. And I enjoyed so much on the criticism about, American study abroad program, it, privileged position of American students, and, the cultural immersion is not really happening as we imagine, and all this neoliberal university environment and how study abroad program is becoming moneymaker. And all these, problems, I enjoyed so much, actually. And also all these very rich case studies from Africa, Europe, and Asia, especially the diaspora tourism study in Vietnam. It was really powerful. I almost cried.
Yeah.
Reading about it.
Vietnam?
Right?
Yeah,
really,
that's a great.
Emotional chapter there too. But very, very rich, maybe because it's done by anthropologists and cultural theorists, I guess. But this book is very, very unique book. Not like you were thinking, like I was thinking, study abroad, we all know. But it wasn't. So that's why I loved this book, actually, and I really appreciate your work.
Thank you very much.
How did you start this project?
I made him do it.
Yeah, pretty much. He made me do it, but I also said I wasn't going to do it without him. So we kind of twisted each other's arms.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It came out, what was that panel? Was it 2016 where we first started talking to each other?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I put together a panel that was kind of a critique of service learning as an element of study abroad, but also a question about study abroad, just starting to get into what are some of the challenges, what are some of the problems, how do we think about the delivery? So we entered into a conversation then around both before the panel was accepted and then on the floor at the meetings. And Michael suggested, well, why don't you put together a book? And I was like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Sure. And then I kind of dodged it for at least a year. And then kind of said, if you really want this book to be written, Michael, you're going to have to do it with me. And that's where we went.
For full disclosure, I mean, the book is part of my book series, so that was why I wanted John. I didn't really want to be the one writing it myself, but I, just like John, we come from a history of study abroad in our own lives. I mean, John can talk about even his professional career. I mean, his university is very heavy on studying studying abroad. And I, grew up, my mom ran a study abroad program. I studied abroad for a year. I worked in the tourism sector, as you know, before becoming an anthropologist. I run my own study abroad. So, I mean, there's a lot of passion that we both have and a real dedication, I think, to seeing that study abroad is done well. That was one thing you had said, Jay, that, is a little bit critical, and I think we are a little critical in, in many of the authors are a little critical in certain ways, but I hope it's constructive criticism in a way. And we all love, and we all are practitioners of study abroad. And so we really invested in making sure that both the students and the administration, as well as the programmers, people who are actually the professors running the programs, are understanding of what study abroad entails and the mechanisms behind the scenes. So that's kind of where we were going, with that book to begin with. And we just, John really brought together an excellent group of authors, John and I guess, but really John, really put together a diverse group of some of the best, cultural theorists and anthropologists that work on study abroad, that's around. So I think it's a really good book.
Yeah, it's really. Yeah,
and just to underline what Michael said, this is definitely, while it has a lot of critique about study abroad and study abroad practice, everybody who's writing in that book is dedicated to study abroad. But they also recognize some challenges that we've got. And as you suggested earlier, some of those challenges connecting to the sort of expansion of the neoliberal marketplace and how that affects the way that universities and colleges understand offering study abroad programs.
Yeah.
And I really like that you brought this anti-tourism concept as kind of core kind of framework. And that's also very unique, right? Tourism and anti-tourism. And some people might kind of misinterpret the term anti-tourism. So do you want to elaborate what anti-tourism means in this book and how that's related to study abroad programs?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think that originally the concept of anti-tourism, when we were talking about it, was sort of an exploration of students' subjectivities about how they understood themselves as students primarily, and then perhaps as tourists secondarily, and that being students gave them some distance from that tourist identification, that tourist subjectivity. So it wasn't necessarily anti-tourism as against tourism, as much it was anti-tourism as almost an antidote to tourism, or a different subject position for the students to inhabit. And it's one that gets very slippery for them, especially in the shorter term programs, because we deal with a lot of providers that are tourist providers. And they're working from scripts of putting together programs for tourist groups. And we are coming with a different set of desires. And students are often, the world is a place that they can go and observe from a distance, and challenging that stuff is, I think, really the heart of what we were trying to do.
Right. And then when we were finishing up, or when we were actually actively writing the introductions and conclusions and everything, it was in that great wave. I remember I was in Italy on a study abroad program, and I think you were in Iceland. And it was that wave of those anti-tourism movements that were going on, those big protests in Barcelona and Dubrovnik and Venice, where essentially it was a political movement of certain youths in these highly touristed cities that were really protesting against kind of the ills of traditional mass tourism. And I think that also kind of worked its way into the book, because, if you look discursively at study abroad and what, we promise students, we promise it to be, like John said, kind of an antidote or opposite to all of those perceived stereotypes of mass tourism, the superficiality, the quickness, where you can't really get real education in there, the undereducation, of a lot of mass tourism. I mean, at the time I was writing, and I think it's worked its way into the book, I had been at a ICOMOS seminar. I was speaking on at an ICOMOS cultural tourism interest group there, and one person from Dubrovnik stood up and she said, the other day I heard like these cruise ship passengers come off, and look around at Dubrovnik, which was the site of Game of Thrones, and they were like, wow, how did HBO build all this? And it's like, oh my God, so that is exactly what study abroad tries to, make sure the students don't come away with, and so I think that, but yet at the same time, there's this intersection of tourism there. Just like we talk about pilgrimage, you know, Jay and I, we published a book on pilgrimage last year as well. You know, what we talk about as like, even though they want to set themselves apart from modern mass tourism, they're using the same infrastructures, right? They're using the same, you know, the same processes. So it's oftentimes in discourse, and then it's harder to get into the practice of it, especially like you said, that the neoliberalization of the university has really kind of constrained the traditional study abroad practice and transformed it from something that was like, you know, reminiscent of the grand tours of like, you know, the last couple centuries where people lived abroad for 2 years and, you know, and all that stuff to, you know, you know, in the 90s, I studied abroad for a whole year. And now our students are lucky if they can go in my program, that's 5 weeks, you know, which is like, you know, too long for people, you know, and part of that is the financial aspect. Part of that is to make sure that more people can do it. And so how dissimilar really is it from a nice trip abroad, you know, for several weeks? So that's, I think, also what really we're getting at in a lot of these chapters and a lot of these reflections.
Right. I mean, you mentioned already, but from this book content, what are the most important problems and challenges that American Study Abroad program have?
I mean, I think for me, I would say the biggest thing that gets, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, but you know, the biggest. No, I mean, I'm a big proponent that, you know, especially if you're trying to do language acquisition, you know, learning a language, or if you really want to get immersed in the culture, a short-term trip it really is not the best way to do a study abroad program. And there are more and more around, you know, the country that are really doing pretty much a Rome, Florence, Venice kind of, you know, highlights tourist trip, the kind that I used to do as an educational tour operator. So there's education embedded in it, but it isn't really study abroad. You're not living in a destination. You're not having to experience that destination, have to muddle through and in a way start to acculturate, you know, to that culture in such a short period of time. I mean, when I was studying abroad and in Italy, in Bologna, you know, I remember having to be there about 6 months before I was really thinking in Italian, when I felt comfortable, when I felt like I was a part of that culture. And so did my housemates as well. And so even 6 months was almost too short. And I was fluent in Italian. I mean, I'm Italian, like, you know, and it's still, you know, like you need a lot of that buildup to really understand and muddle through and learn from your kind of your own cultural mistakes. And really when the hands are being held too much, or when it's too short, it does other things, right? It doesn't do the full immersion that I would like, what I think really defines a true anti-touristic study abroad program.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. The idea of immersion is really difficult to pull off in shorter programs, even, you know, on the face of it, but also with students that are constantly connected to everything else through their phones and all of that, and giving, you know, daily updates to their parents about where they are, or phone calling or whatever. It's really hard to kind of break that student bubble. I mean, I think that's one of the challenges. On the one hand, as Michael suggests, there's a lot of hand-holding that goes on. There's more and more hand-holding that goes on in the university experience, just writ large. So breaking through that bubble, breaking through that hand-holding, putting them in situations that are uncomfortable, but at the same time managing risk, because we want them to feel challenged, but we don't want them to necessarily hurt themselves, right? So there's a little bit also of this sort of pseudo event kind of thing going on, where we create these challenges that seem on their face challenging, but at the same time are mindful of potential litigation. For example, you know, what are our responsibilities? How do we keep our students safe? What do we do with that? So there's all that. So the immersion part is difficult. One of the things that I do, especially in the Iceland program, but also in Morocco, is bring tourism in as a focus for them to critique, so that they can also recognize their own subject position, what they're participating in. I mean, Iceland has 350,000 people, and pre-COVID last year, I think it had 1.8 million tourists. So, you know, looking at that dynamic, how does it change the neighborhood, the city? How does it change the language? How does it change the food? Is also part of it, right? So we're not going to find the fly-in aspect. We're not going to find this perfect kind of authentic thing to see. Let's, you know, sort of take a critical analysis of what's going on, how things are changing, and how we're part of that, right? Our issues, our being there, our demands, our needs and necessities are also part of that, and getting them to recognize that as well, I think, is important.
And it's great that this book and all these discussions and chapters capture these, you know, issues and problems. And to be honest with you, I've been teaching in 3 different countries, and I have to say, America, United States has the most kind of engaging, active study abroad programs. I mean, working in UK, and it's no, study abroad programs are much poorer than America. I don't know why, and students are not very engaging or less interested, obviously. So I know American study abroad program has all these problems, but at the same time, I'm kind of envious how we can get there even in this UK university environment, back in China as well. So America obviously has most kind of active model and practice, for sure, if you're aware of this.
You know what I think it is, and maybe it's just that uniquely American aspect here, but there are some, you know, outcomes or learning outcomes that we really typically, you know, study abroad programs want to emphasize. One of those is to become a global citizen, right? And we problematize this a lot in the book, and lots of our, you know, there are certain chapters by contributors that really, you know, focus on this, because it's a very weird and slippery term. And John can talk more about it, I think. But what I wanted to say,
I was glad that you mentioned it, because
but what I wanted to say in reaction to you is that I think in Europe there's a sense, as even in the UK, of being more attached to different cultures and you know, in Europe, and being more cosmopolitan. And I think in America, you know, we're so distanced from all of that, that in a way, to say we want to become global citizens is trying to say, look, you know, it's easy for a kid in London to jump on a train and go to Paris for the weekend, and they do. You know, my Italian friends are always going all over Europe, you know, Mallorca, whatever. You know, they're not necessarily doing cultural things. They're doing more, you know,
everything's cultural, Michael.
Everything's cultural. But, you know, educational things, I should say. But for us, you know, we don't go to a place that's a totally different country necessarily, or a totally different linguistic, you know, speech community or something like that. And so I think for us, that emphasis on making sure that people get this sort of cosmopolitan nature, you know, through a study abroad program, I think it becomes really important. And then we have to think about how we go about doing that. And then the second aspect is the neoliberal, you know, education system. Again, we have made us focus much more on learning outcomes in general. And so one of those learning outcomes, of course, is being a global citizen, but the others are being, you know, delivering this high impact learning experience, which is something that, you know, basically will stick with you because it's hands-on, interactive, you know, you're getting the most bang for your buck in a way. Which is very American in general. And, you know, and I think so we build those things in, and we emphasize that in our proposals and in our marketing. Whereas, I don't know, maybe in other places that's less emphasized as it is in the US. I'm not, you know, I don't know, but I would imagine that would be the case.
I wouldn't say that my university is a unique example, but it's certainly in a minority of examples for study abroad. First, it's a requirement for everyone, not necessarily abroad, but a study away. So if you're more comfortable staying in the United States, but going to a different community in the United States and studying there, that's a possibility. But study abroad either as a short term, 3 to 5 weeks, or semester long. We folded into the curriculum by having a preparatory class before you go, and then your in-country experience, and then a reflection class after. So it fits into the curriculum in a particular kind of way, and it both sets expectations, but it also establishes kind of a shared experience across the majors, which I think is also pretty useful. And it's also when you're teaching and you're in a room full of third year, fourth year students, you know that a good number of them have been somewhere else and can draw from some of that experience into the classroom, into the discussion. Yeah, the idea of global citizenship as a bright, shiny thing that we sell as an outcome, it's woefully underdefined, but definitely embraced, right? It's probably mentioned now just as much as the comfort zone, or challenging the comfort zone in study abroad literature. I wouldn't say they're completely empty phrases, but they would benefit from some better definition and clear foresight. Absolutely.
Very interesting. Jumbo, I think that's kind of ideal curriculum for college, 1 year or 1 semester requirement for study abroad.
Yeah.
But how can students afford this? University financially support them, or do they?
We've set it up so that nobody is in a position where they can't afford to go to a program of their choice. So through grants, tuition, and other, it's not like we want to be really careful that we didn't have a platinum group, a gold group, and a brass group, right? That you could pretty much go wherever you want to.
Yeah, I mean,
once you get there, I mean, Iceland's an expensive place. So if you want to spend money on top of your tuition and fees to go out drinking or whatever, it's going to cost you a good bit, right? And students are made aware of that before they go.
Yeah, I mean, we have to understand too that his university, Susquehanna, is a private liberal arts college or university,
right?
And I'm a big state, fully funded state institution. So we have maybe in many cases different types of demographics that we have to also be aware of. I mean, for us, our university tries to lower the cost per person for all students. We also want to make sure that anybody who wants to go can go. We have a number of different grants, especially for first generation students, different minority and underrepresented groups, but also they kick in. The university has started to kick in some funds to cover our costs as program providers, so that we pass those savings on to the students, and so that it's not as burdensome as it could be. And of course, that lowers the price per person, maybe a couple $100, but still, it's better than than nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, it's been 27 minutes already. I cannot believe this. And time flies. I feel like I can listen to you guys forever, but since we have only half an hour, if you have one highlight or takeaway from this book, what would that be?
Oh, there's so many. Can we talk about two things?
Okay,
Can we talk about two things? Can we go on a little bit? Because I think, and I don't know what John wants to say, but certainly I think the first thing is that there's an ethical bent to all of this, right? The anti-tourism, and I know I wrote a chapter on the ethics, but it's really permeates all of the chapters here. When you talk about ethics, you talk about it as doing what is right, just, and good. And semantically, even anti-tourism is trying to be that antidote, like we said before, at least discursively, to being a better or being a more just kind of experience for students and also for local providers. The problem is, morally, there are sometimes a lot of conflicts here. You can't necessarily treat the students in the necessarily naturally the best way possible if you're also trying to make the local providers benefit the most from it. We try to do that with service learning and some of those other things, but then again, how burdensome is it on the locals, even though we're trying to give back to them? We problematize all of those things. And then the second thing I would also think that maybe we want to chat about for a couple minutes is the fact that as this was going to press, we were talking about COVID. We had to stop everything because of COVID, and that gave us the opportunity to talk to all of our contributors. And it had been about 6 months since they really had, or 4 months since they really, finished everything up. And we kind of did interviews with them, and we kind of asked them about how they were affected by COVID and what they see as the future of study abroad opening up, when we eventually would open up, and we didn't necessarily think it'd be 2 years or whatever. And we were, I think, really our chapter, which is this epilogue or this, or something like that, conclusion kind of a chapter, really was one of the first things that were written about study abroad, specifically about how COVID affected it and what we see as, the trajectory here. And there were really two trajectories of study abroad at the time. One was saying, everything's going to open up, maybe not exactly as it was, but we wanted to, we're dedicated to making sure that we have that interactive travel experience. And then the other part of the authors, and we saw this in some of our own universities, was that they started questioning whether it was necessary to actually go away physically, right, in order to deliver the learning outcomes that we want, the global citizenship, the interactivity and things like that. Can we do it through Zoom? And again, remember, this is like 2020, so Zoom is this great thing. Now we're all disgusted by it and we're exhausted. But but so those kinds of tensions are there, and I think it works really well because it's all still relevant in 2021 and 2022. But it also, I think, stands as almost a historical document to begin with. That this is something that we were all grappling with right now, and I think it will be useful even in the future. So those are the two things, really quickly, that I would say. But John,
I think there was, building off of what Michael said, I think there was definitely recognition that we're not going to just throw the switch and go back to the way things were. We have an opportunity with this long pause to reimagine some of the things that we're doing, because I think there was also a certain, I wouldn't call it breathlessness, but a certain trying to keep up with the pace of offering programs, in part because they were getting connected to the sort of advertising and program outcomes and whatever of the universities and colleges. So we were kind of running to keep in place. And now we've had like, okay, here's a break, let's think about this. But the other part of that was also reimagining, or trying to reimagine, the sustainability of the programs, right? What kind of sense does it make? Does the carbon footprint offset for flying 18-year-olds to somewhere to paint a schoolhouse and then fly back home? Does that make sense, right? How can we rethink what the outcomes are there? How can we rethink the costs? How can we think more productively about carbon offsets? And it's an ongoing conversation. I don't think we've figured it out yet, but I think it's got a larger presence at the table that it would have if we didn't have to go through the COVID experience.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. In a way, there was a utopian aspect, right, to the COVID.
Yeah, everything's clean now.
Everything's clean. And so there was a real a stronger focus on sustainability, like environmental sustainability, but also economic sustainability. How can we make sure, some of our providers went under? I just heard STA Travels, the student travel organization, which was huge even when I was studying abroad, folded during COVID. So how can we emphasize all three pillars of sustainability: the environmental sustainability, the economic sustainability of programs and institutions, but also the social sustainability? How do we make sure that we give back truly to the host groups? Because, people often were saying things like, well, we put more pressure on locals, and so therefore it might be bad, right? We put pressure on locals, but then when we didn't come in 2020, a lot of our providers were very worried because locals were suffering because they had come to rely on the students who traveled there to do homestays, to cook for them. Some of our providers, some of the authors in our books, donated money. Some, made sure that they still did kind of Zoom classes with them. I sent some of my students to to Elisa, who also contributed to the book, to her class to help her get a class so she didn't have to be completely laid off, during this time. So there's there was a lot of tension. There is no, silver bullet. There is no one clear thing. And that's why I think, we have to make sure, if I could have a takeaway from this, I think the people, the professors, my colleagues who are planning study abroad programs really have to be reflexive and understanding holistically about how their programs work, how their programs affect people, and how they should be able to better, maybe better balance, all these pillars of sustainability for all of the different stakeholders involved in study abroad. And I think all of these authors really did contribute all these different dimensions of things we should be thinking about, and how they could, maybe work these programmatically into their programs.
Definitely. For me, one of the most amazing things about this book was all these complex, big issues are in one book. And you guys did a really good job managing on this in one book. It could be 10 books, I think. So
well, it's not that. It's kind of thick.
and also as
completely approachable.
Oh yeah, working in the UK, not just COVID, because of Brexit, our global engagement, all restructuring and transforming, and they're all hiring new international manager and global engagement team, and there's so many jobs about this, and so much going on around this. So I think I was gonna recommend this book to students, postgrad students, and scholars doing research on this area. But now I recommend this book to university management in the UK. Read this book, right? And research again on study abroad programs. It's really, really crucial. So I think it's very timely publication for us in the UK as well.
Thank you very much.
I bring this book to our dean and vice chancellor.
Please. At least let the library buy a copy.
Oh yeah, at least.
Exactly.
But thank you so much again. It was really, really
thank you.
It was really enjoyable as well. We have 2 minutes. Do you want to say anything else? 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
John, what do you want to say?
Yeah, not too much pressure, right?
No pressure.
Yeah.
Well, where do we see this book going? Yeah.
Being enthusiastic about the book and wanting to pass it along to people, I think we ended up starting by a book that was about critiques, and then also thinking about our own dedication to study abroad. And we never really ended up in a place that was a guidebook, but I think what we do is collectively raise a number of key questions that benefit from future critical thought and engagement. And judging from your reaction, I think we managed to actually pull that off, which is great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't have anything to add after that. I mean, I really I appreciate that you enjoyed the kind of diversity of the contributors as well. I mean, we do have people who are we even cover things like diasporic tourism, and study abroad, like Annie's. Which is a phenomenal chapter, and I've known her for 20 years. The host, like Elisa, who is an Italian anthropologist who brings in American study abroad students. And then we have all of these different other kinds of professors at very different types of universities that really explore very different facets of study abroad. So I think that, we were trying to give a nice holistic look at everything. So I really appreciate it.
Definitely. Yeah, I cannot recommend enough to everyone to read. But congratulations again, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
All right.
Thanks.